Hopefully, you've all been watching the news and you're seeing there's a little bit of a topic called OpenAI that's been, sweeping our industry and honestly every industry for the last few months. And today we've got special guest Julia Kasper here to show you and us how to do OpenAI meets low code. Over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Donna. And yes, you're so right. Over the last couple of weeks, social media feeds have been flooded with conversations about ChatGPT and OpenAI. So today, we want to look and see how we can integrate OpenAI's technology and the Microsoft Power Platform and empower our Power Platform developers and how they can use this technology and build super cool use cases for themselves. So let's start. What is OpenAI? OpenAI, first of all, it's a company. It's a research company and deployment company. They provide a bunch of public available APIs and grant access to their super powerful and AI-trained models using these APIs. So for today's session, we want to focus on one OpenAI API and build a next-gen application using Microsoft Power Apps with it. So let's have a look at those public APIs first. For this, we can just simply scroll through the documentation here, and we can see an API reference documentation here. So for today's use case, we want to focus on the create image endpoint. So first of all, the create image endpoint is an API that uses the underlying model called DALL-E 2, which is basically just another version of GPT-3. So now is the question, how do we get from here to the Microsoft Power Platform, and how can we use this endpoint within the Microsoft Power Platform as well? So most importantly, we want to think about it in a secure and governed way. This is why we are introducing or using Azure API Management as our API gateway service to provide a consistent and secure access to our backend services. And in our use case, an OpenAI API. So first of all, we have to import or add the API to our Azure API Management instance. As you can see, Azure API Management supports a bunch of different types of API. There are a bunch of different ways how to import this API to your instance. For example, you can also just import it using one of your existing Azure resources as well. So for our use case, we just simply manually added the OpenAI endpoint to our Azure API Management instance. All of this documentation can be found here, and we simply just added it and filled out the manually HTTP API form here. So I went ahead and added this API to my Azure API Management instance, and I added the operation create image here. So using Azure API Management, I'm able to modify the request before it goes out to our backend service using a bunch of different policies. So policy help us modify the behavior of the API, and it even lets us add extra security layers on top of it. So in my use case, I added a policy called set header here, because I don't want to worry about authentication. And by modifying the API's header, I'm able to pass along an API key. So authentication just works. And I also don't have to think about it or worry about it from a Microsoft Power Platform perspective as well. So now that we configured and set everything up here, we want to test it in the Azure portal as well. For this, I can quickly hit the test tab right here. And before I'm hitting the send button, you can see for me being able to successfully call the API, I need to first define a request body because my API endpoint needs a bunch of parameters for me to work. So all of this can be also configured in Azure API Management. And you can see I added a bunch of different properties that my endpoint needs. So now that I configured this, I will quickly just hit the send button here. Let's wait. It's always the beauty about a live demo, but perfect. 200, everything worked, and I can see the response here in my body as well. So now that we tested in the Azure API Management portal, we want to expose it to the Microsoft Power Platform. For this, I can easily use the Power Platform tab right here and create a so-called custom connector. I can choose whatever API I want to expose to the Microsoft Power Platform, and I can choose which environment I want the exposure or the integration to work with. So as soon as I hit the Create button, a so-called custom connector will be available on the Power Platform side. So a custom connector, as we learned before during Daniel's session, is basically just a wrapper around a REST API. And in our use case, it's a wrapper around the OpenAI API. So as you can see, as soon as this has been successfully created, I can find my custom connector via the Custom Connector tab in the Microsoft Power Platform. I also want to test it within the portal here. So I can quickly jump to the Testing tab here. And as you can see, all the configurations I did on the Azure API management side are now reflected in the Microsoft Power Platform as well. And the request body gives me indication what the API endpoint needs for my call to be successful. I can also switch to the raw body here, which I will do. I will copy the parameters from my documentation page and hit the Test Operation button. So you can see it's loading, fingers crossed. And I'm getting a 200, perfect. And my body response is here as well. So now that we tested it on the Power Platform side as well, we want to see what this looks like in action in an actual Power App. So for this reason, I built a very simple application in Power App, kind of to showcase what this OpenAI can do. So first of all, I need to add my custom connector to the Power App itself as well. Just make sure via the Data tab, you've added the custom connector here as well. And now you are able, as the Power Platform developer, to use this functionality here as well. So in my use case, I want to, every time I'm hitting the Generate Picture button, I want to make an API call. So for this, I just simply reference the custom connector's name. I reference the operations name, and then in the brackets, adding my request body, depending on the variables I want to pass along with my call. So let's see what this will look like in action. Because I know yesterday was Valentine's Day, let's see what OpenAI comes up with for a gift for Valentine's Day. Let's hit the Generate Picture button. You can see it's loading all the way up here. And perfect. I mean, I can see flowers, I can see jewelry. Maybe I should send my partner this app in the future so he can get some inspiration what to send me next year for Valentine's Day. But yeah, let's kind of recap what we learned today. So today we saw how we can integrate an open endpoint API with our Microsoft Power Platform here. We use this by using Azure API Management to add some extra security and to do this in a governed way. So now our citizen developers or even Power Platform developers, all of them can use the beauty of OpenAI and build their own pretty cool applications with it as well. So now back to you, Donna.
Okay, I am freaking out, people, because that is cool. This is really, really cool. Actually, it's so cool. I would like to implement this in the top secret project I'm working on that my boss now knows about because I told all of you. But I want to move your solution to my environment, my team's environment. And I actually think our next presenters, Karthik and Casey, are going to show us how to do exactly that with ALM, Application Lifecycle Management.